You may get some surprises, you may get some shocks or even some pleasant ones when we rewind back in British social history and look at what we could get for £1 in Britain in 1960. Whilst electrical items were much more expensive back then, everything else, if you compare inflation, was much cheaper. So that's what we're going to talk about today. What Brits got for their £1 note in 1960 compared to 2026. So let's get on with it. First of all, we must mention the average wage. According to the Bank of England statistics, a man over the age of 21 would earn an average weekly wage of £14.10, but the average working week back then was 48 hours. But today's 37.5-hour week, you would earn just under £10 weekly. In 2026, the average wage is £726, but I say this is the average, and I know that people earn much less. It is also important to say that £1 in 1960 would be worth, according to the Bank of England's inflation calculator, the value of £20.21. But we do an actual fact calculation on the rise of just shopping items and services, and it works out at just under £13. So that's a big difference for a start. Prices are calculated in metric money for easy calculation, but if I can, I will do the imperial ones as well. You'll understand as I go along. So a loaf of bread was just under 5p in new money in 1960, and probably had far less additives as well. That works out at about £1 and a penny today. So 20 loaves of bread for your £1 back in 1960. Not even one loaf today. Well, not a decent one, as the average loaf of quality would be around £1.40. Discount stores, they sell bread for less, but fresh bread that doesn't have preservatives and never seems to stale sets you back much more. Staining bread in 1960? Bread pudding with currants and suet. A pint of milk in a glass bottle that was much more recyclable, as the milkman would tick it straight from your doorstep, and it was priced at 3 new pence, whether gold top or not, which inflates to around 57p today. Now buying a single pint of milk will set you back an average of 85p. That's in Tesco's. But many do buy a larger pack, maybe a 4 and 6 pint carton, which lowers the average quite a lot when you buy a pint. So you're working it out at about 41p supermarket prices for a pint if you buy the big cartons. But it is important to say here that many large supermarkets use milk as a go and get me item, normally underpricing it to get customers through the door. So for the 1960 price tag, you would get 33 pints for your £1. You could afford to be Cleopatra and bathe in the stuff. Butter was measured by the pound, so let's convert and calculate. Now the avoirdupois calculation was standardised to an exact measurement in 1959. That's why I picked 1960, just so we could get a little bit more precise. So a pound in weight is worth 444 grams, around that. So let's work it out. Right, a pound of butter was just under 7p, so you could get 14 pounds of butter in weight for your £1. You ready for this? 6.35 kilos of butter for £1. Today, if you wanted that much butter, you'd be paying £28.57, averaging at £4.50 per kilo, or £9.35 a pound. So, from 7p a pound in 1960 to £9.35 in 2026, eh? A butter mountain of your very own. Now, according to general inflation figures, that price should only have inflated to £1.81. Something went wrong, eh? A dozen eggs. Now let's take large eggs and free-range ones. I know they all vary massively, but the average price in 1960 for a dozen eggs was 3 shillings and 8p, which is 18p in new money, or new pence if anybody remembers that. That suggests 5.5 dozen eggs, or precisely 66 eggs in 1960 for £1. Today you get about 4 single eggs for your £1 coin. Remember, large free range ones though. But that's a 62 egg difference and a lot of omelettes. Egg, cheese, ham omelette with a bit of paprika. Spend £1, use 4 eggs. You remember when a tin of corned beef was the standard cupboard filler because it was cheap. After all, it was sent to soldiers during both wars. That's how long it's been around. And in 1960, the average 12-ounce tin would cost you £1.11, which means 10p in new money. Easy one to work out, this one. You get 10 tins of corned beef for £1. Now that's according to general inflation, but it should work out at paying 69p today. Now general inflation is calculated on every single item we buy, whether individual or corporate. So you got your fuel, gas, electricity, travel, clothes, household, all that. But food inflation, as we can see, is not indicative of these figures. And we can see that by noting a tin of branded corned beef is around £3.50 today in Tesco's. However, if you pop into Aldi, you can get a tin of a non-branded corned beef for £2.05. Has anyone tried it? Let me know in the comments. We're now moving on to baked beans. We'll use Heinz, as bean prices are so varied today, but I'll give you some prices of what I'll call decent brands later on. Now, in 1960, that tin of beans was an average of 4 new pence. So you could get exactly 25 tins of baked beans for your £1, probably with less sugar and probably with more tomato for your £1. But just out of interest, did you know that the recipe for Heinz beans has changed over a dozen times? And I bet it ain't for our behalf. The sauce is much sweeter today. I wonder if anybody else has noticed that. Now, I have seen Heinz baked beans sell for as much as £1.49 for a tin, or you could buy one of these multi-buys and buy 1,000 for about £600. But the lowest price of beans I've seen is 27 pence, and they're from Aldi. Do me a favour, leave them on the shelf. But Bramwell's beans that you can get from Aldi or Lidl is 40 pence a tin, and they ain't bad. And my favourite is Branston. Branston beans with a richer sauce, 80 pence. Now, according to general inflation, the average should be 48 pence. Now, I've mentioned this before, but do you remember the supermarket bean war in 1994, when beans were as low as 4 pence a tin? Funny though, they never had a lamb chop or a fillet steak war, did they? Right, we are now going to go out on a night out in 1960. That'll be a bus ride to the pub, a packet of cigarettes, a few drinkies, and a fish and chip supper, and a taxi home. Let's find out the difference, what we'd pay back in 1960 to today. 1960. A bus ride would be about an old penny. So that's for a short hop fare. So that would mean you get 240 bus rides today. So you could be on that bus for about 3 months, especially with the traffic. Maybe I'm exaggerating. Or am I? It's about £3 today for a single bus journey on average. So you'd get to the pub and you'd pay your average price for a pint of bitter, which would be 8 new pence. So that's 12.5 pints for your £1. The price today does depend on very much where you live. Many of us drink lager and real ale, so in the Midlands where I live it's around an average of £4 a pint. London prices I've seen as much as £7.50. Although Wetherspoons, if you like a dull evening, is much cheaper. So let's go for the £4 a pint, eh? You'll finish your night off with a short, or one for the lady. A short such as a brandy or a whiskey with a mixer would be 12p for a £1 in 1960, meaning that you could get 8 drinks for your £1. That's if you could still stand up. Today's cost averages around £4.60. And as many more people smoked back in the 1960s, many pubs would sell you cigarettes from behind the bar and not using vending machines, so you get it at normal shop prices. And a packet of cigarettes for 20 would set you back at 19 new pence, so you would get 5 packs for your £1 today. Looking at the average price today for a packet of cigarettes, £14. And God, I don't buy them anymore. Now your average short taxi ride, which was predominantly hail and ride the black cabs, would be around 12p. Now the average mile fare is around £6 according to Uber, but it really is varied. But I can tell you this, I can remember a fare from Dagenham to Richmond was £3.90 in the mid-60s. Now that's for 34 miles. Now according to minicabbing.com, the fare would be an average of £93. So fish and chips today would cost you £12 on average. In 1960, just around 15 new p. So that's 7 portions for your pound. And I'm talking cod and haddock, not that cheap Alaskan pollock rubbish that sneaks into our meals today. Some pubs still serve that, and if you go to a certain restaurant, which I won't give the name away, it'll be unfair, but he was old and he had a farm, they don't use cotton either. So your night out in 1960, your bus fare, your 5 pints, your whiskey chaser, a packet of cigarettes, cod and chip supper to take home in your taxi, and it's strange how it's worked out, but it will cost you 99p, so a night out for £1. Today, this is in the Midlands, £60.20 for that same night out. God blimey. Right, let's go and post a letter. And you could do, as long as it was 2 ounces or 57 grams, for under 2 new p. Meaning that you could post 50 letters off or send 50 Christmas cards if you got that many friends for that pound. There was no second-class postage at the time. This would not be introduced until 1968, where second class was 2 new pence and first was 3 new pence. But the maximum weight had increased to 114 grams or 4 ounces. Prices didn't increase on postage again until 1971 with decimalisation. Now, very few people had home telephones in the 1960s. And one can understand why. And the reason being is because they were very expensive. There were no unlimited deals like that we get today. People had to pay for every single call that they made. And it depended on what time of the day that you placed your calls. So you had off-peak and on-peak. Peak time was during between 7 and 9 and early evenings, and after that people knew they had a cheaper rate of calls. Now calls were charged by the unit, and the unit would click over as soon as somebody answered the telephone. Whether you were on the telephone for like 2 seconds or you used the full unit, however long that was going to be. So in 1960, very few people could afford to have telephones in their houses. So as you will see, when we compare a cost of having a home telephone in 1960 to today, you're going to be quite surprised of the difference in prices. Now a 12-minute call, which is a peak call, would normally run up to 2 units, and 2 units would cost 2p. That inflates to 41 pence today. If you decided to make a call off-peak, then you would use maybe 1 unit, and that would be a penny, which calculates at 21 pence today. Now a 3-minute trunk call, a trunk call is a long distance call more than 60 miles. And bearing in mind, if you're only on the phone for 3 minutes, that call would cost you 2 shillings or 10p. So that works out at £2.03 today. So half an hour chat is what you could get in 1960 for £1. Now we have to bear in mind that the standing charge in 1960 works out around £41 in today's money, 2026. Now the average standing charge, if you like, is £31 today. So that will be your internet, your landline and unlimited calls. And remember, this £41 was without you even making a call at all. So when I say it cost you absolutely nothing compared to 1960, in reality it was less than that. So yes, it's a hell of a lot cheaper to have and use a home telephone today than in 1960. Could you do with a coffee whilst juggling all these figures? Well, you will have paid 4 shillings in 1960, 20 pence for a 4-ounce jar. That's 114 grams. Tesco Nescafe price. Today in the same store they are flogging 100-gram jars of the same coffee for £4.35, slightly smaller jar. So for your £1 back then you could get precisely 570 grams of coffee. Today you'll get 23 grams for your £1. Larger jars obviously work out cheaper. Or if you want to get cheaper coffee, just buy Mellow Birds if you're not a coffee fan. Right, I'm just going to go off the rails here because I've got to jump to 1961 because Fray Bentos pies were just arriving in the country. But unfortunately I cannot find a price, but I did find some information that may shock you. Well, we all know that Fray Bentos pies have gone up in price and the average price is around £3. But if you look on this website, thebritishcornershop.com, and check out the price of a Fray Bentos pie, £7.29. I could not believe my eyes. Anyway, moving on. It's breakfast time and we're just about to have our cornflakes, which a branded box would have been 1 shilling and 8 new pence, giving you just over 12 boxes for your £1. Now Asda are advertising a similar size box for £3.82. 8 pence worth may not be even fact enough to fill your bowl. I'm not going to, but you could probably count them. Now I know what you're thinking. There are cheaper, just as good brands out there. I know, but I'm comparing like for like. And Aldi and Lidl, they weren't around in the 1960s. So there. Well, we've eaten and we've drank. Let's watch some TV. What's on tonight? Well, let's look at the good old Radio Times. It'll give you a rundown of all the TV and radio programmes because Google or BBC iPlayer were not around. That weekly magazine works out at 3 pence in new money in 1960. Compared to this, I was shocked. I read this online. I must admit I had to phone somebody just to get confirmation. £5.50 for a copy of the Radio Times. So in 1960 you got 99 weeks of Radio Times for that £1. That's an 18,500% increase. 3 pence in 1960 only inflates to 61 pence today. Makes you feel woozy, makes you feel unwell, listen to all this, but never mind, the doctor will write you a prescription, and in England you will pay £9.90. Now that prescription is not for the whole prescription, it's for each different medicine on it. Now I'm sure there was a time when the charge of that prescription was for the whole lot, regardless of how many different medications were on that form. In 1960, the charge for medication prescriptions was 2 shillings or 10 pence, which inflates to just £2 and 3 pence. So you could be ill 10 times for your £1, so to speak. There are of course more exemptions for this charge compared to yesteryear. People can subscribe to a monthly subscription and therefore pay a lower amount, or long-term and what is considered life-saving medication such as insulin or antiretrovirals for HIV patients are free, just for an example, regardless of your financial status. Well, that was a lot of information regarding old money and new money, and I really do hope that you managed to keep up with me, and I hope I haven't made any mistakes. Trust me, I literally picked every calculation site going to work out these figures, so there may be some margin of error, which I do apologise for. But if you want to know what your £1 was worth in, let's say 1971 or even 1981, those videos are also on my channel, plus other social history videos, mainly about Britain. So it just leaves me to say one thing: thank you so much again for watching, and bye for now. Now I almost forgot about the chocolate bar. Hey, the original creamy milk one, not that rubbish that you get today full of bloody palm oil, and obviously slightly bigger. Now surprisingly, a chocolate bar was 6 pence, which calculates at 2.5 pence in new money. When the money changed over, by the way, in 1971, that price from 1960 changed only by ½ pence. However, it went down. The majority of chocolate bars in 1971 went to 2 new pence, which was a little bit cheaper than what they were paying before. Decimalisation wasn't brilliant for people, I know that, but I had to mention this one-off where people did save themselves, well, a tiny little bit of money. No.